Today is Thursday, December 24th, 2020. I'm your host, Max Gottlich, and I talk about my interpretations and insights in financial markets and the overall economy. US new home sales for single family home sales in November, and this is month over month, fell 11% to 841,000 annualized versus an estimate of 995,000 with an estimate of 0.5%, a 0.5% change. And this was a slight miss, to say the very least, a very, very um, uh, big trend correction, if you will. And the median sale price for these homes is over $335,000, which of course is fueled by record low mortgage rates, which is fueled by the Fed because they happen to own most of the outstanding debt issuances. And this goes for the ECB as well because, well, they literally purchase more than what's issued in bonds and bills. And this is the formula for utterly destroying sovereign debt markets. And we are getting a front row seat at it. And consumer sentiment is slipping further with 1 year inflation expectations, rising to 2.5%. And again, this is 1 year inflation expectation. So there's not a lot of confidence at all. And speaking of inflation, some deflation bugs compare M2 velocity to CPI. And we've talked about CPI in the past, and they claim inflation can only occur with a rising velocity of money supply. And by the way, velocity is simply a ratio of nominal GDP to M2 money supply. So it's essentially the frequency at which $1 is, right? $1 is used to purchase goods and services, um, included in GDP. But the deflation bugs are wrong because if you look back at 1945, the year 1945, which was marked the end of World War II, you will see an extremely low level of M2 velocity, but annualized inflation actually spiked extremely high. So the Turkish lira has lost 80% of its purchasing power in relation to silver, and the dollar has lost 27% of its purchasing power in relation to gold just this past year alone. Now, this makes sense when you compare, surging precious metal prices relative to currency destruction. So jobless claims clearly reflect the fear of not only lockdowns, but also higher taxes as the Biden administration takes over effective 2021. And of course, the outcome in Georgia for the Senate will be the most vital factor in determining how high taxes will actually be and how big our stimulus checks will be. But of course, stimulus payments and company bailouts and massive QE and higher taxes, it's the ultimate destruction formula for our free market economy. Instead, we must let the unsustainable businesses fail and at the very least tax people not on what they earn but rather on what they spend. But Washington is blinded by the fact that they think they can control the business cycle and the credit cycle, for that matter, by printing fake dollars. And we are progressively seeing they are tremendously wrong. And so now the entire globe, not just domestically, must learn from this the hard way. And speaking of stimulus, the new bill, which is coming into law, which is over 5,000 pages long, it's a very long bill. Nobody's had time to read this at all. Will give small businesses around, $325 billion, $166 billion in direct checks, and $120 billion in unemployment benefits, among other stimulus. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? But those are the main genres of this bill. But this is just, again, it's just the tip of the iceberg. And because airlines and universities and even the Kennedy Center and virtually everyone will get free money because spending our way out of debt with more debt is the new norm because Washington and central bankers have dug us into a very deep hole that we'll never get out of. And all of this while real wages in the US, uh, they've been decreasing really since the 70s. Even the Mexican peso is up like 20% against the dollar due to their current account surplus, which apparently they really shouldn't be having, but that's another conversation. Something the US does not have. In fact, we have the largest, um, twin deficits in the world. And, but there's $70 billion in foregone rental payments, which means there's quite literally millions to be evicted because number one, right, this stimulus bill does not remotely help America, aggressively speaking. And number two, because of the fact people can't pay rent, it means tenants will default on their mortgages. So really, the divergence between the real economy and the stock market has never quite been this large before, which also means the wealth gap has never been as large as it is now. I wanted to take some time today and really talk about a recent development in the analytical framework surrounding the dollar. And it's this ideology has been developed by what I think of as a truly inspiring global macro money manager. His name is Brent Johnson, and he's also really popular on Twitter. And who I hope one day I can, interview him on right here on the Max Gotlet show. How nice would that be? But anyway, the dollar milkshake theory is the ideology that in a debt-based monetary system, the dollar surges, and it surges much, much higher. It's argued that there is a dollar shortage because, for the record, trillions of dollars that need to be serviced will enable a bid. And, if people default as well, or essentially just the destruction of money, the disappearance of money, it'll result in a supply shock, which will immediately result in a higher dollar. So the economy has all this excess liquidity, right? Primarily in the form of bank reserves from massive QE, which is essentially the straw or the US sucking all the liquidity out of the system, or the milkshake. And it's a world reserve currency, the dollar. So there's no, there is a natural bid for the dollar, and apparently there will always be demand for it too. The rest of the world, they owe like $15 trillion, and they can't print it. They can't print dollars. So that certainly backs the demand side for the dollar. And Brent Johnson, he believes central banks across the globe injected liquidity, and it's really a non-determinant as to which central bank actually starts QE, because the entire globe is essentially adopting money printing in their form of currency. But I would counter with the dollar milkshake theory, saying, how can our economy, first of all, possibly be recovering, and the new norm is, going $5 trillion in debt per year, because that's how much debt was added to the national debt just this year alone. And that's the most accumulated national debt we've ever seen. I argue that the definition of inflation, and we've talked about this, is the expansion of the money supply, point blank, period. And so the Fed is ultimately reducing the supply while the market absorbs all of the selling. So all the net short speculators and dealers that are net short too, on the long end of the curve, like the 30-year most especially, right? Because we've never, we've literally never seen this large of net shorts accumulated on the 30-year, but even so, they have not been able to get prices to fall, because the Fed and their QE is literally too powerful. And this will eventually force a short squeeze from these speculators, these speculative shorts, which will make interest rates ultimately go to zero and gold to go much, much higher. Okay, everyone, this is all I wanted to discuss for today. I hope you all enjoyed, and please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I really appreciate all the support, and please note, as always, I am not a financial advisor, and everything I say is for educational purposes only. All right, thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.